Welcome, my friends. Tonight you step onto the galactic stage, a tiny cog in a vast creaking diplomatic machine that's about to either save civilization or send it spiraling into a rather messy universe-spanning war. Imagine the scene. You're standing at the precipice of an enormous, echoing chamber. Lights from 100 different star systems glinting off strange, metallic surfaces, and the even stranger carapaces of beings who consider oxygen optional. The air, if you can call it that, thrums with a tension so thick you could spread it on toast, if toast, and indeed spreading, were concepts understood by the beings currently staring daggers, or perhaps concentrated energy beams, at each other. This is one of those high-stakes diplomatic missions where, honestly, you are probably not walking away with a participation trophy, and might be not walking away at all if things go sideways, which, spoiler alert, they usually do in these stories. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. I'd also love to see where and when you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see how far these little journeys reach. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The journey to the Citadel of Concord, a name so grand it practically demands its own orchestral score, was the usual blur of hyperspace corridors and the low omnipresent thrum of a star-class diplomatic vessel. You have spent weeks, or maybe it's months, time gets a bit wibbly in FTL, mentally preparing, sipping recycle, mentally preparing water that always tastes faintly of the ship's engineer's despair, and trying to master the pronunciation of names that sound like a sack of wet gravel falling down a spiral staircase. The docking sequence was smooth, a testament to the station's millennia of experience in handling everything from majestic flagships to, well, your rather utilitarian human shuttle, the UN's polite inquiry. You almost named it, slightly concerned. As you proceed through the gleaming, almost painfully sterile corridors of the Citadel, the air filtration system hums a monotonous tune, a bland counterpoint to the cacophony of alien languages that occasionally filter through your universal translator. The translator in your ear is doing its best, though it occasionally translates grave existential threat as mildly inconvenient Tuesday, which you know isn't entirely wrong sometimes, depending on how your week is going. Signs in flowing bioluminescent script that your implant struggle to render into something legible guide you toward the grand convocation hall. You pass beings of all shapes and sizes, towering insectoids clicking thoughtfully, gelatinous blobs quivering with what you hope is anticipation, and beings that appear to be sentient crystals, refracting the station lights into dazzling, disorienting patterns. You're in your best diplomatic neutral gray, feeling like a pigeon at a peacock convention. At least it's machine washable. Some of those peacock equivalents look like they require dry cleaning on a planetary scale. You know the stakes. The briefing, delivered by a very serious admiral with a jawline that could cut dure steel, was stark. The Zargonian Empire, known for let's call it, ornate sense of superiority, has managed to utter something that the Krill hegemony, a species whose defining cultural trait is taking everything with the emotional nuance of a plasma cannon, has interpreted as a declaration of war. Historians back on Earth still argue whether the Peloponnesian War could have been avoided with a better translator, or perhaps just a slightly less arrogant Athenian envoy. You muse on how little has changed, just the scale. Instead of city-state, it's star empires. Instead of triremes, it's dreadnoughts, capable of cracking continents like eggshells. You remember your crash course on Krill etiquette, particularly the bit about their extreme literalism. It makes you think about the Glargonians from the neighboring sector who always present a perfectly smooth river stone, polished for generations as a sign of initial respect. Get the polish wrong, offer a stone with even a microscopic flaw, and you've committed a microscopic flaw. Grievous insult. It's a delicate universe out here. You wonder if the Zargonians offered the crew a flawed metaphor. The massive, ornate doors to the convocation hall hiss open with a sound like a giant exhaling. If the corridors were bustling, the hall itself is a study in suspended animation. Hundreds of delegates are already seated in tiered platforms that curve around a central, sunken area. Each platform is environmentally tailored to its occupants, some shrouded in mist, others bathed in searing light, a few even submerged in what looks suspiciously like artisanal mud. Your own designated alcove is mercifully standard. Breathable atmosphere, comfortable gravity, and a view that's not entirely obstructed by the flapping leathery ears of the delegate from Batrakas Prime. The silence in the hall is the loudest thing you've ever heard. It's a silence pregnant with unspoken accusations, with the weight of fleets mobilizing millions of light years away, with the collective breath-holding of trillions of souls. You can almost hear the faint, ghostly echoes of past ultimatums, the spectral pronouncements of forgotten wars. You find your seat, a surprisingly comfortable chair that molds itself to your form, and try to look like you belong here, like representing a species that only recently figured out how to stop poking itself in the eye with sharp sticks on a cosmic time scale, is perfectly normal in this august company. UI, the nutrient paste dispenser reserved for carbon-based bipedal life forms with a distinct lack of enthusiasm. It's the color of regret and probably tastes like it too. Galactic historians still argue whether the infamous Great Cafeteria Riot of Silos Prime was about the blandness of the protein rations or a deeper political schism. You suspect the food. A ripple of movement draws your attention to the central dais, a being of immense size and gravitas, a Xylosian arbiter whose Xylosian arbiter species is renowned for their, usually, impeccable neutrality and lifespans that make glaciers look impatient, rises slowly. Its crystalline facets shimmer, and its voice, when it finally comes, is like the grinding of tectonic plates, resonating deep in your chest. Delegates of the Galactic Concord, the arbiter intones, each word seeming to hang in the supercharged air. We are convened today under a shadow of imminent conflict, a shadow that threatens to engulf us all. You feel a single bead of sweat trace, a path down your temple, or maybe it's just the air conditioning finally giving up. Either way, the show is about to begin, and you, bless your cotton socks, have a front row, if slightly obscured, seat. The Silosian arbiter waits, its crystalline form somehow conveying a profound patience, as the echoes of its opening statement fade into the charged silence. The floor is now granted to the esteemed representative of the Krill hegemony. It declares, its voice a neutral rumble, yet carrying the weight of impending judgment. They elucidate the circumstances that have brought this assembly to such a critical juncture. Every multifaceted eye, every sensor array, every curious antenna swivels towards the Krill delegation. From their heavily shaded alcove, a figure emerges. It moves with a rigid, almost mechanical gait, its body encased in what appears to be articulated plates of a dark, matte-finished alloy. This is Ambassador Cathar of the Krill hegemony. You've read the psych profiles. Krill value strength, directness, and view any form of ambiguity as weakness or deception. Their language, you recall, has no subjunctive mood. Things either are or are not. There is no might be. Cathar's footsteps on the metallic platform ring with a distinct, deliberate impact, each one a tiny hammer blow against the fragile piece. The Krill ambassador delivers their initial movements with the kind of awe, fiery indignation usually reserved for when your favorite streaming service removes that one show you were just about to binge. You know the feeling, a deep personal affront. Cathar reaches the designated speaking platform. It saw multifaceted optical sensors, glowing with a faint crimson light, sweep across the assembled delegates before fixing on the Zargonian platform with unnerving intensity. Esteemed arbiter, fellow delegates, Cathar's voice is a harsh, rasping baritone, amplified by their suit, each syllable clipped and precise like shard of obsidian. We are here because the Krill hegemony, a sovereign power of this galaxy for 10 millennia, has been subjected to a calculated and egregious provocation by the Zargonian Empire, an act of such blatant disrespect, such thinly veiled contempt, that it cannot be ignored. A hush falls, if that's even possible in a room already so quiet. Cathar makes a curt gesture with a gauntleted hand. Above the central dais, a holographic display flickers into existence. The Zargonian message hovers in the air, glowing in that specific shade of official communication blue that screams, "This is important and probably boring. Except this time, anything but." The text translated into Galactic Standard reads, TE20, the illustrious Krill hegemony, the Zargonian Empire, extends its formal acknowledgement. We have observed, with continued interest, your unwavering commitment to your traditional martial displays. These displays, renowned across the star clusters, continue to impress diverse audiences with their predictable grandeur and meticulously preserved heritage. May your strength endure through the cycles. Surface, you think it's almost polite, terse certainly, but not overtly hostile. You can see a junior diplomat somewhere in the Zargonian bureaucracy patting themselves on the back for that one. But then you look at Ambassador Carr, whose carapace seems to vibrate with suppressed rage. Observe. Carr commands, a clawed finger jabbing at the projection. They claim unwavering commitment to our traditions. In Zargonian parlance, as confirmed by our most trusted linguistic analysts, unwavering is a term reserved for the static, the unchanging, the obsolete. They are saying our martial traditions, the very soul of the Krill, are fossils. The Krill ambassador's voice rises in pitch and volume, and then, this predictable grandeur, predictable, they dare call the glorious unpredictability of Krill battle strategy, honed over centuries of conflict and triumph. Predictable. This is a direct assertion that our tactics are known, easily countered, and therefore weak. It is a mockery of our might, an insinuation that we are strategically barren. You recall reading about the MS Dispatch back in the 19th century on Earth, a message from the Prussian King Wilhelm I to Otto von Bismarck, which Bismarck then edited and released to the press. The French perceived the edited version as deeply insulting, and it became one of the sparks that ignited the Franco-Prussian War. It's amazing how a few carefully chosen or carelessly chosen words can set galaxies, or just nations, alight. Meticulously preserved heritage. Ka practically spits the words. Another bar. They imply we are living in the past, incapable of innovation, clinging to relics while they, the supposedly progressive Zargonians, advance. And the final sentiment, may your strength endure through the cycles. A clear taunt, wishing us well while implying our impending decline. Sinolinguists still argue whether the concept of subtext is a universal constant in sentient communication, or a peculiar quirk of carbon-based life forms who apparently enjoy making things complicated for themselves. The krill, it seems, are firmly in the subtext is just unsent text camp. You glance over at the Zargonian delegation. Ambassador Vorlak, a being of shifting chromatic scales and elegantly waving head fronds, looks utterly flabbergasted. Their normally vibrant colors have muted to a sort of distressed lavender. The Zargonian ambassador's face, a symphony of those iridescent scales and now rapidly twitching antennae, is currently performing a silent opera titled All Stars. What have we done? Or perhaps, what are we on about? Vorlak opens their mouth, a delicate petal-like orifice, as if to speak, but the arbiter raises a crystalline hand, a silent command for patience. Catharis now a low, dangerous growl. This is no mere diplomatic slight. This is a challenge, a calculated insult designed to test our resolve, to provoke us. The Zargonian Empire has spat upon the honor of the krill. Such an act, by our most sacred laws, demands retribution. They seek to portray us as rigid and outdated. We shall show them the eternal, ever-renewed fury of the krill. The crimson glow from Cathar's optics seems to intensify. You remember that quirky, almost comical incident, the Andromedan olfactory incident of 72, where a trade negotiation almost collapsed into open warfare because the Andromedan ambassador's ceremonial scent glands, when exposed to the station's specific atmospheric mix, produced a pheromone that the other delegation, the methane-breathing hfy, interpreted as a declaration of extreme aggression. It took weeks of careful scent analysis and frantic apologies to smooth that one over. This, however, feels significantly less accidental, or perhaps accidentally much, much worse. A wave of murmurs and subtle shifts ripples through the assembled delegates. Some look grave, others deeply concerned. A few, particularly those from species known for their opportunistic tendencies, seem almost excited. You can practically see them mentally calculating asteroid mining rights in the soon-to-be contested krill-Zargonian buffer zone. You, meanwhile, focus on maintaining an expression of concerned neutrality, hoping your face isn't betraying the sudden, wild thought that's beginning to form in your mind. Concludes with a sharp, decisive nod. The hegemony has spoken. We await the Zargonian's explanation, though we doubt any words can mend this deliberate fracture of peace. Cathar turns and stalks back to its alcove, each step echoing like a nail in the coffin of diplomacy. The arbiter lets the silence stretch for a moment, allowing the weight of the accusation to settle. Then, its gaze shifts to the Zargonian platform. Ambassador Vorlag of the Zargonian Empire, the arbiter's voice resonates once more. You have heard the grievance of the krill hegemony. The council now awaits your response. Ambassador Vorlag of the Zargonian Empire rises, their chromatic scales shimmering with an attempt at regained composure, though a faint undertone of what you can only describe as nervous mauve still flickers across their fronds. Esteemed arbiter and delegates, Vorlag begins, their voice a melodious tenor, a stark contrast to Cathar's harshness. The Zargonian Empire is, to put it mildly, astounded by the krill hegemony's interpretation of our message. Emphasis on interpretation that already sounds like it's going to rub the krill the wrong way. Our communication, Vorlag continues, gesturing gracefully with a many-jointed limb, was intended as a standard diplomatic acknowledgement, a gesture of continued observation. If you will, the Zargonian people have always appreciated tradition, and the krill are nothing if not Traditional Borlag is now attempting a verbal tap dance on a floor covered in very thin ice, all while juggling invisible justifications. It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for 'em. You can almost hear the Zargonian internal monologue. Just keep smiling. They're primitives. They'll never understand our sophisticated wordplay. As Vorlag prattles on about Zargonian linguistic subtlety and the long history of their poetic diplomatic overtures, something in the back of your mind begins to connect. You pull up your mental files on Zargonian culture, specifically Section 7, subsection Beta, humor and wordplay, advanced forms. The Zargonians, it turns out, have a penchant for what they call warvo, lively, sharp-edged pleasantries. It's a form of high-context communication where compliments are deliberately phrased with a superficial layer that could seem negative to the uninitiated. The true appreciation understood only by those intellectually nimble enough to see the deeper, positive intent. It's their version of a verbal wing nudge, a shared intellectual game, essentially Zargonian dry wit. And it seems Ambassador Vorlag's predecessor, who drafted this message, was trying to be exceptionally clever. The words unwavering commitment, predictable grandeur, meticulously preserved heritage, viewed through this lens of E.A. Claveau, suddenly shift unwavering commitment ESNT, static and obsolete. It's steadfast and reliable, predictable grandeur isn't boring and easily countered. It's consistently impressive, something one can always count on to be magnificent. Meticulously preserved heritage isn't living in the past, it's cherishing and maintaining a rich legacy. The Zargonians weren't insulting faffing krill. They were attempting a highly stylized, if incredibly risky, form of praise. And then it hits you, not like a bolt of lightning, more like that moment you find your keys in the refrigerator. Confusing, slightly embarrassing for the universe that it got to this point, but undeniably ye thereon. The Zargonians weren't being malicious. They were being Zargonian, and spectacularly bad at reading their audience. Vorlag, meanwhile, is blissfully unaware of your epiphany and is currently making things worse. And so, while we regret that the krill hegemony's more direct mode of understanding has led to this unfortunate confusion, Vorlag says, their tone dripping with condescension that they probably think is subtle charm, we assure the Council that no offense was intended towards their unique cultural expressions. The implication is clear. You krill are just too simple to get our sophisticated jokes. You see Cathar's mandibles tighten. If krill had eyebrows, they'd be singeing the ceiling. The concept of face, mianzi, and rian in many Earth cultures, particularly in East Asia. The Zargonians are desperately trying to save face, to appear intelligent and in control, while the krill feel they have profoundly lost face, their honor publicly questioned. Vorlag's explanation is only making the krill dig their heels in further, determined to restore their lost honor through, well, probably lots of explosions. You briefly imagine the history books, Chapter 7, the War of the Poorly Phrased Compliment. It doesn't have quite the same ring as the Peloponnesian War, does it? The problem is, the Zargonians are too proud, too steeped in their own intricate communication style, to just say, oops, our bad, we were trying to be clever, and it backfired. And the krill are, by their very nature, incapable of seeking out such a convoluted, non-literal interpretation. Galactic sociologists still argue whether true humor is a convergent evolutionary trait, or if each species' version is so unique as to be mutually unintelligible without extensive cultural immersion. Right now, you're leaning towards mutually unintelligible, with a hefty side order about to cause an interstellar war. You recall a lecture about the Peliptok, a species from the Crimson Nebula, who use intricate interpretive dance for all significant emotional expressions, including formal apologies. The Peliptok incident of the Crimson Nebula still serves as a cautionary tale for aspiring diplomats. Always stretch before you executed grand gesture. During the regretful pirouette phase, once nearly led to a full-scale trade embargo over a perceived insult to the recipient's gravitational stability. It's funny in hindsight, less so when you're watching a similar, if less graceful, diplomatic disaster unfold in real time. A cold dread settles in your stomach, much worse than the nutrient paste from earlier. You, a relatively minor diplomat from a species considered a galactic newcomer, a bit of a quaint oddity, might be the only why, being in this entire convocation hall of hundreds, who actually understands what happened. The Zargonians are too arrogant, the Krill too rigid, and everyone else is either confused, indifferent, or already mentally dividing up the spoils of the impending war. The Arbiter's crystalline gaze sweeps the room, perhaps sensing the rising tide of disaster. Vorlak is concluding their non-apology apology with a flourish of fronds that practically screams case closed. You my all applaud my brilliance now. Cathar looks like it's about 5 seconds from self-detonating out of sheer fury. What do you do? Speaking out of turn is a massive breach of protocol. You're not even a primary party in this dispute. You're here to observe, report, and vote if absolutely necessary, probably on sanctions against whoever shoots first. Interrupting now could get you censured, recalled, possibly even ejected from the Citadel. Humanity's already precarious standing could take a nosedive. But the alternative is watching two major galactic powers, and likely their allies, stumble into a war that could devastate sectors, extinguish civilizations, all because of a badly landed joke and a galactic-level failure to communicate chinois. All because nobody here understands the concept of saying one thing and meaning another, not out of malice, but out of, well, style. A very, very, very poorly chosen style in this instance. The weight of this unwelcome knowledge presses down on you. To speak or not to speak, that is, quite literally, the multi-trillion credit question. The Arbiter's multifaceted gaze seems to linger on Ambassador Cathar, then on the smugly unhelpful Ambassador Vorlak. You can almost see the gears turning in that ancient, crystalline mind, preparing to guide the council towards the grim, logical next step, likely a formal condemnation, followed by the rattling of interstellar sabers. Cuthar's mandibles are practically quivering, radiating an aura of just give me the word. Vorlag is preening, oblivious. It's now or never. Your Yova heart hammers against your ribs like a trapped bird. Your mouth is suddenly as dry as the deserts of Kepler 186f. With a deep breath that does little to calm the sympathetic storm in your nervous system, you reach out a slightly trembling finger and activate the request to speak rune on your console. It glows a hesitant green, as if to say, "Are you Jim sure about this, buddy?" There's still time to fake a sudden case of space hiccups. A tiny, almost imperceptible chime echoes through the hall, a sound rarely heard from the minor delegation alcoves during high-stakes confrontations. Silence, not the tense, pregnant silence from before, but a new, shocked silence. The collective attention of the council swivels toward you with the speed and silence of 100 startled owls who just realized a field mouse is giving a lecture on cheese-making. Ambassador Carrer's crimson optics bore into you. Ambassador Vorlag's fronds stiffen in surprise, their scales flashing an undignified shade of confused chartreuse. Even the Silosian Arbiter's facets seemed to shimmer with a hint of Could it be surprise? The delegate from Terra. The arbiter's voice rumbles, a faint note of incredulity, lacing its usual gravitas. It consults a hovering data stream. Representative, your name. Is it? Yes, esteemed arbiter. You manage. Your voice amplifies slightly by the alcove system. It sounds steadier than you feel. My apologies for this interruption, especially given humanity's relatively recent inclusion in this august body. You try for humble, deeply respectful. However, I believe I might possess a cultural perspective, a linguistic nuance, that could potentially shed some light on this most unfortunate misunderstanding, and perhaps offer a path away from an escalation we would all deeply regret. A ripple of murmurs goes through the hall. From the corner of your eye, you see the delegate from Batrachus Prime's leathery ears perk up, quite literally. The arbiter considers you for a long moment. You can feel the weight of its gaze, ancient and appraising. Ah, cultural perspective. It repeats slowly, while protocol dictates primary parties address grievances first. The situation is uniquely volatile. Very well, representative. You have a brief window. Proceed, but be concise. Better be good, little mammal. You nod, a quick, jerky motion. Thank you. Esteemed arbiter, here goes nothing. What I wish to discuss is a form of communication, a way of using words that is not always straightforward. It's a method where the literal meaning of the word spoken or written does not align with the speaker's or writer's true intent. In some cases, the intended meaning can even be the direct opposite of what is expressed on the surface. You're trying to explain a concept that half your own species barely grasps to a room full of aliens who probably think subtlety is a type of cheese. This is fine. Everything is fine. You continue, choosing your words with utmost care. Necessarily born of deceit, though it can be misused like any tool of language. In some cultures, including certain Zargonian intellectual traditions, as I understand them from our preparatory briefings on a clairvoyant, it is considered a sophisticated, even playful, way to convey respect or camaraderie, to engage the listener in a deeper level of interpretation. The reactions are mixed. Ambassador Kada's optics narrow. You can practically feel the waves of suspicion rolling off the crude allegation. Is this some human trickery? An attempt to defend the clearly duplicitous Zargonians? Ambassador Forlac, on the other hand, looks intrigued and perhaps a little miffed. How dare this primitive human articulate something about Zargonian high culture that they themselves fail to convey? Other delegates simply look bewildered, their translators likely struggling to find an equivalent concept. You recall the ancient oracle at Delphi on Earth, whose pronouncements were famously ambiguous. Kings and generals would receive prophecies like, if Croesus goes to war with Cyrus, he will destroy a great empire. He did, and the great empire he destroyed was his own. The words were true, but their obvious meaning hid a deeper, often contrary, reality. Messages you reflect have refuges. You reflect always been tricky things. Universal linguists still argue whether the capacity for deception is a prerequisite for, or a corruption of, true sophisticated language. You're hoping to argue for a third option, complexity without inherent malice. You've read about the Flume Fay from the Miasma Nebula, a species whose language supposedly has 7 distinct layers of truth, conveyed by nearly imperceptible pheromonal shifts accompanying their vocalizations. The same Flume Fay sentence can mean yes, no, maybe, only if the stars align on a Tuesday while I'm wearing my lucky squirrel hat, and 3 other things you wouldn't even understand. The Flume Fay are a nightmare at poker, by the way, and their diplomats are either lauded as geniuses or decried as the most frustrating beings in the galaxy, depending on the outcome of negotiations. This mode of communication, you press on, trying to project sincerity and a touch of academic dryness, relies on a shared understanding, a context that might not always be apparent to those outside that specific cultural framework. When that context is missing, or when one party communicates with extreme literalness, the potential for profound misinterpretation is significant. You pause, letting that sink in. I believe such a misinterpretation might be at the heart of the current crisis. The Zargonian message, when viewed through the lens of this indirect linguistic approach, might convey a meaning entirely different from the one the Krill hegemony has understandably perceived. You look directly at the arbiter. With your permission, esteemed arbiter, I would like to offer some simple examples of this communicative style, drawn from human experience, to illustrate the principle. Perhaps by understanding the mechanism, we can better assess the intent. The arbiter remains silent for a beat, its crystalline facets rotating slowly. You can't read its expression, if it even has one. The fate of God knows how many lives hangs on its decision. Then, with that familiar grinding rumble, it speaks. The council's time is precious, representative from Terra. But the cost of error is galactic. Proceed with your examples. Briefly, a wave of relief, so potent it almost makes your knees buckle, washes over you. You've got your foot in the door. Now you just have to avoid getting it metaphorically slammed on your fingers. A small wave of gratitude washes over you, quickly followed by the immense pressure of the task ahead. Thank you again, esteemed arbiter, you say, trying to sound more confident than you feel. You clear your throat, addressing the vast, silent assembly. This indirect communication, this way of speaking where words conceal rather than reveal their primary intent, often relies on context, tone, or shared cultural understanding. Let me start with a very basic example from human interaction. You pause, then adopt a slightly exasperated, weary tone. Imagine a human has just experienced a minor misfortune. Perhaps they've spilled a beverage on important documents. Several delegates whose species consume liquids visibly wince in sympathy. They might exclaim, "Oh, great, that's just what I needed." You deliver the line with all the sarcastic bitterness a human can muster. Now, the literal words suggest this event is positive, even welcome, but the tone, the context of the spilled beverage, the accompanying facial expression of, let's call it, mild despair, all indicate the speaker means the precise opposite. They are expressing frustration, not pleasure. You scan the room, mostly blank stares. A few delegates are tilting their heads or equivalent sensory organs, as if they're trying to detect a strange frequency. The cruel ambassador, Cathar, meticulously made a note on their datapad, probably under human vocal anomaly, potentially contagious, pathological. You make a mental note to avoid coughing in Cathar's direction for the foreseeable future. One gelatinous being from a high-gravity world slowly passed a confused shade of puce. Clearly, that landed like a lead balloon. Perhaps a more substantial example is in order, you say, soldiering on. All right, for this next example, we're diving into the deep end of the human psyche. Life jackets are optional but recommended, especially if you're of a nervous disposition or currently digesting. This one's a classic from an Earthling writer named Jonathan Swift, from a period about 3 Earth centuries ago. You take a breath. This is the tricky one. Modest proposal. At the time, his proposal, homeland of Ireland was suffering from extreme poverty, famine, and overpopulation, conditions exacerbated by exploitative policies from its more powerful neighbor, England. Many lived in abject misery, Swift, deeply angered by the suffering and the indifference of the wealthy and powerful, wrote this proposal. You project a summary of the text onto the holographic display. His proposal, presented in a calm, logical, and seemingly serious tone, was this: that the impoverished Irish should alleviate their economic woes by selling their 1-year-old children as food for the rich. He even included calculations for the number of children available, receipts, and the economic benefits. A wave of audible reactions sweeps the hall. Gasps, hiss, clicks of distress. Ambassador Qatar's crimson optics flare. They proposed consuming their young. Kuthai's voice is a low, horrified rumble. "'Tis is monstrous, unnatural." Several delegates from species with strong parental instincts look physically ill. You see a few delegates subtly shielding their young, or what you assume are their young. They could be particularly fancy briefcases. It's hard to tell with FIFA. Sylphians. Point is, the eating babies part really got their attention. Not quite in the way you'd hoped. The Zargonian ambassador, Vorlag, looks pale, their scales a sickly yellow-green. Even they seem to find this beyond the pale awe. Clairvoyant. Exactly the reaction Swift intended. You interject quickly, raising your voice slightly to be heard over the rising disquiet. Please, allow me to clarify. Swift was not seriously advocating for cannibalism. He was using this horrific, unthinkable suggestion to shock his audience, to force them to confront the true horror of the situation in Ireland. His true targets were the apathy of the landlords, the cruelty of the socio-economic system, and the inaction of the government. By proposing something so morally repugnant in such a rational, detached manner, he was holding up a distorted mirror to society, screaming, "If you can stomach this idea, then why can you stomach the actual suffering that is happening right now?" You try to explain that the essay was a savage critique, a desperate plea for compassion and reform, cloaked in the guise of cold logic. The literal words you emphasize were the exact opposite of his true message. His aim was to condemn the conditions that made people desperate, not to offer a literal solution involving, well, that literary theorists back on Earth still argue whether the primary function of satire is to amuse, to instruct, or to incite rebellion. Swift, you struck suspect, was aiming for all three, with a heavy dose of horrify into action. The uproar subsides slightly, replaced by a profound, galaxy-wide confusion. Some delegates look marginally less horrified, but mostly just more bewildered. See them trying to reconcile the idea of saying something so terrible to mean something good. It's like trying to explain quantum physics to a house cat. You might get some polite blinking, but comprehension is another matter entirely. Thinking of incongruity, you briefly mentioned the Great Emu War in Australia in 1932. How the Royal Australian Artillery, armed with machine guns, waged a military operation against a population of emus, large flightless birds that were damaging crops. The emus, through their sheer numbers and ability to scatter, effectively won, and the military withdrew. Sometimes, you offer, reality itself presents us with these incongruities, these situations where the expected outcome is comically, tragically subverted. Understanding that things are not always as they literally appear is a human coping mechanism and sometimes a communicative tool. This tidbit is met with more blank stares, explaining that a professional human army was outmaneuvered by large, feathered ornithological menaces probably didn't help your case for human sophistication. You feel a bead of sweat. Swift was perhaps too potent an example for a first deep dive. You had hoped to illustrate the power of awe. Indirect meaning, but you might have just convinced half the council that humans are, at best, dangerously eccentric, and at worst, closeted baby-eaters with a bizarre sense of humor and a history of being outsmarted by birds. The Zargonians were trying to be subtly witty. Swift was using a rhetorical sledgehammer. Perhaps something a little less visceral is needed. The Arbiter's facets remain unreadable, but you sense a new layer of skepticism, perhaps even concern, emanating from the front central dais. The path to de-escalation through linguistic enlightenment suddenly seems a lot steeper and considerably more fraught with peril than it did just a few minutes ago. You need to pivot and fast. Right, you think, damage control. Swift was. A lot. My apologies, esteemed delegates. You begin trying to project an aura of calm competence you don't entirely feel. Perhaps that example was overly visceral for an initial illustration. The principle of saying one thing while meaning another exists on many, far simpler, less alarming scales. Before you can offer a G-rated example of irony, like complaining about a beautiful day, Ambassador Kutar's armored form straightens, an almost audible creak coming from its joints. Esteemed Arbiter, harsh voice cuts through the hall. I request permission to address the Terran representatives. Unusual assertions. The Arbiter's facets slowly rotate. The Krill Ambassador may speak. Qatar turns its crimson optics directly on you. There's no heat in them now, just a cold, analytical light. Representative from Terra. It begins, its voice resonating with the conviction of unshakable logic. Explanation of this indirect communication is deeply troubling to the Krill hegemony, and I suspect to any species that values clarity and truth. You can see Cathar's logic circuits practically smoking as he tries to process the idea of words having a secret off-menu meaning. It's like trying to explain al dente to a microwave. Communication, Cathar states, its voice a flat declaration of fact. It's the bedrock of understanding. It is the framework upon which societies are built, treaties are honored, and laws are upheld. For communication to function, words must have clear, unambiguous meaning. If, as you suggest, one can say yes and mean no, or present a horrific proposal and claim benevolent intent, then how is trust possible? How can any statement be verified? How can one distinguish this irony, as you are beginning to call it, from a deliberate falsehood, from a lie? The Krill ambassador pauses, letting its questions hang heavy in the air. The history of my people, the Krill, is instructive. Our Krill historians teach that the Great Schism on Canthar Prime, an era of devastating civil wars that lasted for centuries and nearly extinguished our species, was ignited by the whispered interpretations, a series of official pronouncements and treaties, deliberately phrased with subtle ambiguities by those seeking to sow Kawa, were twisted and reinterpreted until no one knew what was true or who to trust. Brother turned against brother, clan against clan, all because the meaning of words became a weapon of confusion. This, you realize, is their species' foundational trauma, the historical scar that shaped their entire approach to language. It was only by systematically purging all forms of linguistic ambiguity, Cathar continues, its voice hardening, by mandating absolute literalness in all official and personal communication, that the Krill hegemony was forged and our civilization saved. We learned, at a terrible cost, that words must mean what they say. There is no other rational path for an ordered society. Fa then gestures towards the holographic display still showing the Zargonian message. You claim the Zargonians, in their message, might have meant the opposite of their words. If their words, which on the surface appear to be faint and perhaps clumsy praise, were not intended as literal praise, then by your Ronron definition of this irony, they must indeed be insults. If predictable grandeur does not mean consistently impressive, as you posited it might in some convoluted Zargonian word game, but is instead its opposite, boring and easily counter as, understood it, guilty of mockery, this irony does not absolve them. It merely offers a more elaborate mechanism for their deceit. You try to interject. Ambassador, the intention is crucial. Cathar cuts you off with a sharp, chopping gesture. Intent that is not reflected in the words is functionally non-existent, or worse, it is a hidden intent which is inherently suspicious. How can one verify an unstated intent? Through mind reading, through trusting the speaker who has already proven their words are not to be taken at face value. It is a paradox that invites deception. Carr basically declares that if human communication were a starship, it would be constantly leaking fuel, occasionally exploding, and generally considered unfit for work travel. He's not entirely wrong. To be fair, especially if you've ever spent time on certain internet forums, cognitive philosophers back on Earth, and probably on a few other planets too, still argue whether a species entirely devoid of metaphorical thinking could develop advanced abstract reasoning, or if metaphor is somehow fundamental to higher consciousness. Cathar and the Krill seem to be making a strong case for highly advanced, yet rigidly literal intellects. You're starting to feel like you're trying to sell ice to a Hoffian, only the ice is an incredibly complex socio-linguistic concept, and the Hoffian is armed and very, very literal-minded. You remember reading about the Sylphians, those sentient crystal clusters you saw earlier, communicate through incredibly complex, shifting patterns of light and color. A particular historical text mentioned a famous Sylphian diplomatic incident. During tense negotiations between two warring crystal clans, a junior diplomat, overcome by a momentary flicker in their power supply, mistwinkle a sequence. This accidental pattern, by sheer coincidence, happened to be the ancient, highly ritualized Sylphian proposal of clan fusion, essentially a marriage proposal between the two clan leaders. The accidental betrothal of Chieftain Glar and Warlord Squee, two notoriously grumpy octahedrons, led to about an hour of stunned silence, followed by 3 weeks of frantic renegotiation and universal apologies. Though it did, amusingly, diffuse the immediate hostility out of sheer, crystalline embarrassment for all involved. Sometimes even miscommunication has its accidental upsides, though this Krill situation doesn't feel like one of those times. Ambassador concludes, his voice ringing with absolute conviction. This irony you describe, Terran, appears to be a flaw in communication, a dangerous indulgence in illogic. It is not a tool of understanding, but an agent of chaos. The Krill hegemony stands by its interpretation of the Zargonian message. Their words, if not literal praise, were a literal insult, artfully or ineptly disguised. There is no third option that satisfies logic. Cathar returns to its alcove, leaving a palpable sense of reinforced skepticism in its wake. Many delegates nod slowly, swayed by the Krill's forceful, and from their perspective, impeccably reasoned argument. Your attempt to clarify seems to have only provided Cathar with more ammunition to define irony as inherently deceptive. Ambassador Vorlak looks even more distressed, their scales now a truly unfortunate shade of muddy purple. Your brief moment of having the Council's ear is evaporating. Collective doubt presses down on you. The Arbiter's gaze is fixed on you, expectant and perhaps a little impatient. You take a steadying breath, feeling the weight of Cathar's logical and culturally ingrained objections. He has a point. Several, in fact, all very sharp and well-aimed. Arguing with a Krill is like playing verbal chess with a supercomputer. That's also a main battle tank. Ambassador Ka, you begin, your voice calm and respectful, your points regarding the necessity of clarity and the dangers of ambiguity are entirely valid. Trust is indeed paramount, and you are correct that language, intended to mean its opposite, ye can be, and often is, used for deception. You pause, letting that acknowledgement settle. However, this human concept, which we often call irony or sometimes sarcasm, is not always about a simple binary of a versus not a. It can also involve layers of meaning. Imagine the literal words are a canvas, and irony is a special lens, or a particular tint of paint, applied over that canvas. The original image is still there, but it's viewed differently, understood with an added dimension, usually due to context, tone, or a pre-existing, shared understanding between the parties. You can see a few delegates trying to visualize this. The Flumfa, with their 7 layers of pheromonal truth, might actually be nodding. If they had heads, let's put on our linguistic surgical gloves, esteemed delegates, you say, gesturing toward the holographic display of the Zargonian message, which obediently recenters itself. And let us dissect this particular communication again, keeping in mind the Zargonian cultural trait of clairvol, their sharp-edged pleasantries, which, as I understand it, prizes intellectual playfulness and layered meaning as a sign of sophistication. First, unwavering commitment to your traditional martial displays. You highlight the phrase, the Krill hegemony, with its history and emphasis on directness, interpreted unwavering as static, unchanging, obsolete. Fair interpretation, if one expects only literal meaning, but within a up-to-level framework, might unwavering commitment be intended to praise something so foundational, so core to Krill identity, that it needs no change? Could it mean steadfast, deeply rooted, a reliable pillar of their strength and heritage? A Zargonian intellectual might see the ability to maintain such powerful traditions without deviation not as a weakness, but as a profound cultural achievement. You move the highlighter. Next, predictable, grandeur, Jaras, twitch almost imperceptibly. Again to the Krill, predictable logically means easily countered, strategically barren. A direct threat to their military pride. But consider this. On my home world, Earth, we have a famous geothermal feature, a geyser called Old Faithful. Its eruptions are incredibly predictable, occurring at regular intervals that people can set their watches by. Millions travel to see it. Its predictability doesn't make it boring. It makes its grandeur reliable, a consistent spectacle of nature's power that visitors can count on experiencing. Could the Zargonians, in their own ornate way, have been attempting a similar sentiment, praising the Krill martial displays as being so consistently magnificent, so reliably impressive, that their grandeur is a known, celebrated constant across the galaxy? You can almost hear the cricket chirping in the silence, or perhaps that's just the Batrakan delegate's breathing apparatus. And finally, you say, highlighting the last contentious phrase, meticulously preserved heritage, the Krill Lighty interpretation, living in the past, incapable of innovation. Again, a logical conclusion from a literal standpoint, but through the lens of Iklarva. Could this be an expression of profound admiration for a species that so deeply respects and diligently maintains its rich cultural legacy, not as clinging to relics, but as a testament to the enduring value and strength of that heritage? You lower the pointer. The core issue here, as I see it, is not necessarily malicious intent, but a catastrophic failure of assuming shared context. The Zargonians, if they were attempting clairvoyance, were speaking a highly specialized, nuanced form of their own cultural language. They were, essentially, trying to impress a first date by quoting obscure poetry, while the date was just hoping they'd pass the nutrient paste. Classic communication mismatch, scaled up to galactic proportions. This gets a faint ripple of something, might be not amusement, but perhaps recognition from some of the more interculturally experienced delegates. Communication theorists back on Earth still argue whether a message's meaning resides more with the sender's intent or the receiver's interpretation, especially in cross-cultural contexts. This situation here is a prime candidate for their next 1,000 research papers. You recall the Sokol hacks from the late 20th century on Earth? A physicist named Alan Sokal wrote a scientific paper filled with deliberate nonsense, but phrased it beautifully with all the correct postmodernist jargon of the time. He submitted it to a leading journal of cultural studies, and they published it, thinking it was a serious, profound contribution. It caused a huge uproar when he revealed the hacks. It demonstrated how even supposedly sophisticated groups can misinterpret complex language if it sounds right within their framework, or how easily intent can be masked by a specialized vocabulary. In this case, the Zargonians' specialized vocabulary of wit. The Zargonians were being ironic in their own cultural style. You conclude? They were not necessarily lying, Ambassador Cathar. They were speaking, perhaps arrogantly, perhaps foolishly, in a way they expected another sophisticated intellect to appreciate on a deeper level. They failed to consider that the Krill hegemony, with its own valid and deeply ingrained cultural imperative for literalism, would not possess that specific lens, that specific shared understanding. It wasn't a direct lie, but rather a message broadcast on a frequency the receiver wasn't equipped to tune into. Ambassador Forlak, the Zargonian, is watching you with an expression that's a bizarre mix of dawning comprehension and something akin to horrified relief. Perhaps they're finally seeing how their cleverness was perceived. Ka remains impassive. Its Tsar remains impassive. Crimson optics still fixed on you, unblinking, but you notice a subtle shift in the attentiveness of some of the other delegates. The Silosian arbiters' facets slowly rotate, catching the light. Maybe, just maybe, cracked open the door to a different interpretation, one that doesn't inevitably lead to blaster fire and exploding starships. The silence that follows is less hostile, more thoughtful. The Silosian arbiter allows the thoughtful silence to linger for another moment before its voice, like the slow turning of ancient cosmic gears, fills the convocation hall. The representative from Terra has presented a novel perspective on Thera, nature of the Zargonian communication. This concept of irony, of layered meaning, is now before the council. I open the floor for deliberation on this matter. Is this a legitimate, if complex, form of communication, or is it, as Ambassador Ka contends, a pathway to deception? A murmur ripples through the delegate. First to speak is a willowy being from City Alpha Verf, a species known for their intricate philosophical poetry and seven-dimensional art forms. Esteemed arbiter, I find the Terran's explanation intriguing. It fluted, its voice like wind chimes. Irony allows for greater depth of expression, for a playful engagement of intellects. Then it could be a mark of cultural sophistication. How, Terran, does one reliably distinguish malicious intent from artistic license in such communications? Before you can answer, a gravelly voice cuts in from a shadowy alcove. It's Ambassador Gruk of the Vulcani, a species whose homeworld is a tectonic nightmare, making them naturally suspicious of anything that isn't solid, straightforward, and preferably carved in stone. Sophistication, or obfuscation. Grok growled. My people have a saying, Clear lava flows predictably. Muddy water hides sharp rocks. This irony sounds like very muddy water, a perfect tool for those who wish to speak with a forked tongue, to plant barbs while claiming innocence. How many treaties could be twisted, how many promises broken, by claiming the literal words were merely ironious? Then Ambassador Forlac of the Zargonian Empire rises, their scales now a more hopeful, if still cautious, shade a merrill green. Esteemed arbiter, fellow delegates, Vorlak begins, their voice smoother than usual. The Terran representative has astutely touched upon an aspect of Zargonian high culture. Wavol, our sharp-edged pleasantries, is indeed a recognized form, an intellectual art meant to be shared between minds capable of appreciating its delicate interplay. Forlac conveniently omits their spectacular failure to consider their audience. It is not intended to deceive, but to engage, to complement not just the subject, but the recipient's acuity in discerning the nuanced praise. Care of fair, of the crew hegemony responds instantly. Engage in what? Zargonian, a guessing game where the fate of sectors hangs in the balance. Even if we accept, hypothetically, that your Buclarvo or the Terran irony is not intended to deceive among your own kind, how can it be anything but a source of confusion and mistrust in interspecies communication, especially when directness is paramount for survival? How would we instruct our universal translators for this concept? If Zargonian speaks, assume 50% chance of opposite meaning unless Tuesday. He shakes his massive head. It is an unacceptable variable in diplomatic discourse. It is a risk no logical species would tolerate. And so the debate begins, a fascinating, if slightly terrifying, glimpse into the galactic psyche. Fizz-crack of the quadrant of pure logic, a being composed of interlocking geometric shapes that hum with computational energy, attempts to create a truth table for irony on their display. You can see the flowcharts branching into impossible infinities, the symbols for true and false blurring into a frustrated gray. You can almost see the smoke starting to come out of their logic vents. It's not pretty. A delegate from a highly empathic, almost telepathic species, the qualia soldiers, expresses concern. The emotional distress caused by such misinterpretations, by feeling mocked when praise was intended, or by missing genuine affection cloaked in harsh words, it would be deeply wounding to the psyche. The Ferengi-esque delegate from the Grand Trade Alliance, all glittering lobes and twitching fingers, perks up. A most interesting concept. This irony, they chirp. Tell me, Terran, does ironic intent void a contractual warranty? If a sales representative says, oh, yes, this ship will indefinitely last 1,000,000 light years, with this ironic tone, are we covered when it disintegrates in the first asteroid field? Asking for a friend, of course. You're listening to a dozen different species trying to mentally dissect a concept that Earth poets and comedians have wrestled with for millennia. It's like watching a group of toddlers try to assemble a hyperdrive. Noble effort, terrifyingly unpredictable results. You recall the War of the Worlds radio broadcast by Orson Welles in 1938 on Earth. It was a stunning piece of radio theater, a fictional story of a Martian invasion, but presented in the style of a live news report. Many listeners who tuned in late, missing the introduction that explained it was a dramatization by the Mercury Theater, panicked, believing it was real. It highlights how easily even humans, who are supposedly familiar with fiction and irony, can be misled if the context is missed or the framing is too convincing. This brings to mind the cricket, a species from a remote star system whose language and psychology reportedly have no concept whatsoever of hypotheticals, counterfactuals, or fiction. Everything spoken is, for them, a direct statement of current or past reality. Galactic historians still argue whether their first encounter with a human exploratory team, during which a well-meaning xenolinguist attempted to share the simple children's story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears, was a come-dead misunderstanding or a near-diplomatic disaster. The cricket, upon hearing of three bears who lived in a cottage and spoke galactic standard, immediately launched a full-scale scientific investigation. The cricket inquest into Ursini vocalizations and unauthorized habitation took 3 standard years, involved multiple research vessels, and yielded no talking bears, but a great deal of cricket bewilderment and a lingering suspicion of humanity's grasp on reality. Ethicists, both on Earth and likely on other worlds with too much time on their hands, still argue whether a noble lie, a falsehood told to achieve what the teller believes to be a greater good, can ever be truly justified. This irony, some delegates are clearly thinking, feels dangerously close to that territory. A sort of socially acceptable, deniable untruth. Who decides if the hfy's layered meaning is clever wit or just a convenient way to backtrack from an unwelcome statement? The council chamber is now a tapestry of voices, some raised in genuine inquiry, others in suspicion, a few in outright condemnation of such linguistic slipperiness. The Zargonians look marginally relieved that they are no longer the sole focus of negative attention. The crew remains steadfast in their view that this is all dangerous nonsense. You've certainly given them something to talk about other than troop movements and kill ratios, but whether you've steered them away from war or just introduced a new and fascinating way for them to misunderstand each other before they start shooting remains to be seen. The question still hangs heavy in the recycled air. Is irony a tool, a weapon, or just a peculiar human quirk that has no place in serious galactic affairs? The debate swirls around you, a cacophony of alien perspectives on truth, lies, and the murky gray areas in between. The Silosian arbiter, after allowing the discussion to breathe, finally raises a crystalline hand. The council has explored and various facets of this irony. It rumbles, representative from Terra. You have spoken of words meaning their opposite and of layered meanings. Are there other forms of this concept that might illuminate its nature further, perhaps one less reliant on the speaker's potentially ambiguous intent and more on situational context? This is your opening. Indeed, esteemed arbiter, you reply, grateful for the steer. There is another common form, one that humans often call dramatic irony or situational irony. This occurs when there's a contrast between the reality of a situation and what characters or participants believe to be true. Okay, folks, let's switch gears from saying what you don't mean to knowing what they don't know. It's like being in on a cosmic prank, but sometimes the prankster is the universe and the punchline is, well, explosive. You try to think of a clear, neutral example. Imagine you begin painting a picture for the council, a powerful species. Let's call them the Valiant Commanders. They have constructed a new flagship, a colossal dreadnought, the pinnacle of their technology, hailed as the Unsinkable T2, a name chosen with, perhaps, a lack of historical awareness. But let's set that aside. A few delegates familiar with Earth's naval history might have caught that subtle joke. The Valiant Commanders broadcast its invincibility across the galaxy. They boast that its shields are impenetrable, its armor too thick for any known weapon, its offensive capabilities unmatched. You lean into the description. Now, these Valiant Commanders are preparing for a decisive confrontation. They are supremely confident. They make grand pronouncements about their inevitable victory, their ship's flawless design, but imagine that we, the observers, or perhaps their adversaries, through brilliant intelligence work, know something the valiant commanders do not. This is where you need to be careful, crafting a general scenario. Let's say this mighty dreadnought, despite its overwhelming power, has a peculiar, almost insignificant design flaw, perhaps a specific, rarely used hyperspace coolant intake located in an unshielded section of the aft ventral nacelle, which, if targeted by a precise particle burst of a specific oscillating frequency just as the ship initiates its jump sequence, could trigger a catastrophic overload in the primary drive core. So, this hypothetical superfortress, think of it as having an Achilles heel. If Achilles were a 2-mile wide space station, and his heel was an unshielded thermal exhaust port just big enough for a wump rat. Wait, that sounds rather familiar, doesn't it? You quickly add, or perhaps they rely on a new cloaking technology that, unknown to them, has a peculiar energy signature easily detectable by a common, outdated model of Zargonian sensor array that everyone else decommissioned cycles ago because it was considered obsolete. As you utter these specific, yet still hypothetical-sounding details, the coolant intake, the particle burst frequency, the outdated Zargonian sensor array, a sudden, profound stillness emanates from the krill delegation's alcove. Ambassador Qatar, who had been rigidly observing you, freezes mid-posture. The crimson glow in its optics seems to flicker, dimming for a fraction of a second before returning, perhaps a shade less intense. Its massive, gauntleted hands, resting on the console before it, clench almost imperceptibly. Beside Cathar, its 280s, previously just stoic background figures, are now utterly motionless, like statues carved from dread. You're focused on explaining the concept of dramatic irony, when the valiant commanders proudly declare, "Our enemy will shatter against our impervious defenses," or "Their primitive sensors will never detect our approach." Their confidence becomes deeply ironic to those who know about the coolant intake or the Zargonian sensor vulnerability. The audience understands that the commander's pride is based on ignorance of a fatal flaw, a flaw that could lead directly to their doom. Their words mean one thing to them, but something entirely different and tragic to those aware of the full situation. You glance briefly at Cathar. He and his aides are looking even more stony-faced than usual. Might be they're not fans of dramatic irony. Or perhaps my hypothetical flagship needs better fictional architects. Tough crowd, you press on, oblivious to the true nature of their shock. This is akin to the ultra-intelligence breakthroughs during Earth's Second World War. You continue, trying to provide a concrete historical parallel. Allied cryptanalysts broke the German Enigma codes, allowing them to read vast amounts of secret German military communications. German commanders would issue orders, supremely confident in their security, unaware that the Allies often knew their plans, their troop deployments, their U-boat locations, sometimes even before their own field officers did. The German High Command's confidence was, in that context, tragically ironic, as they were operating under a fatal illusion of secrecy. The Krill delegation isn't just still. They're radiating a kind of focused, high-energy panic that's almost palpable, even to you now. It's not the aggressive fury from before, but something colder, deeper. It's the look of a species that has just realized its most guarded secret. It's ace in the whole strategy for the impending war with the Zargonians. A surprise first strike exploiting a precisely engineered Zargonian sensor blind spot they believed only Wangmi knew about, coupled with a plan to neutralize Zargonian flagships via a vulnerability in their FTL drive coolant system, has just been casually laid bare before the entire Galactic Council by a bumbling human diplomat talking about literary devices, military strategists across the galaxy, and certainly on Earth, still argue whether true invincibility in any defense system is even theoretically achievable, or if every shield inevitably has its corresponding spear, every plan its unforeseen flaw. The Krill had believed my plan was flawless, their spear irresistible. Now they're staring at you as if you personally forged the counter-spear and handed it to the Zargonians. You think of the blobfish from Earth, that famously unattractive deep-sea creature. Its gelatinous, seemingly shapeless form is a perfect adaptation to the crushing pressures of its natural habitat miles below the ocean surface. Brought to the surface out of that high-pressure environment, it becomes a comical, deflated caricature. The Krill's intricate, secret war plan, so perfectly designed for the specific pressure of Zargonian defenses as they understood them, suddenly looks like that blobfish out of water, exposed, vulnerable, and frankly, a bit ridiculous now that its core assumptions have been aired so publicly. Ambassador Cathar slowly, very slowly, raises one hand. The movement is stiff, almost pained. The crimson in its optics is now definitely dimmer. It looks defeated, or perhaps terrified. The entire Krill delegation has the collective look of someone who just realized they've not only shown their hand in a high-stakes poker game but have also accidentally revealed they were cheating, wearing X-ray glasses, and had an extra ace hidden in their heavily armored sleeve. All at the same time, a very different kind of silence now descends upon the convocation hall. This isn't the silence of tension or confusion anymore. This is the silence of sudden, dawning, galaxy-shattering realization, and it's starting to dawn on you that your innocent, hypothetical example might have just hit something far too specific, far too close to home for the Krill hegemony. The air crackles. The silence in the convocation hall is no longer just quiet. It's a vacuum, sucking all the air and idle thoughts out of the vast chamber. Every delegate, every censor, every floating mote of dust seems frozen, fixated on the Krill delegation, and, by extension, on you. That dawning realization hits you with the gentle subtlety of a rogue asteroid. Your hypothetical wasn't just hypothetical, was it? You've accidentally stumbled into the galactic equivalent of knowing where all the skeletons are buried, and you just announced it at the skeleton family reunion. The way Ambassador Cathar and his aides reacted, that wasn't intellectual disagreement or polite bafflement. That was the unmistakable look of a covert operations team whose meticulously planned, top-secret mission just got live-streamed across the Galactic News Network. Cathar is a monument to frozen shock. His usually aggressive, forward-leaning posture has recoiled, making him seem almost smaller within his formidable armor. The articulated plates of his suit, which normally shift and adjust with micro-movements, are utterly still. The crimson light from his optic, usually a steady, intimidating glow, now flickers erratically, like faulty warning lamps on a failing reactor. You can't hear it from your alcove, but you'd bet credits to Spacelint that his internal comms are a maelstrom of a maelstrom. Panic Krillian expletives. Kyle looks like his entire operating system just encountered a blue screen of death, only it's crimson, and the screen is his soul. He's not just shocked, he's existentially gobsmacked. The Krill aren't just concerned that their war plan is known. They must be grappling with how it could possibly be known, especially by a representative of a species considered a relatively minor, if somewhat quirky, galactic player. Espionage on this level against the Krill hegemony's most secure military planning. Unthinkable precognition, some bizarre human mystical ability tied to this incomprehensible irony concept you've been blathering about. For a species as rigidly logical as the krill, the unknown is terrifying, and an unknown method of intelligence gathering is the stuff of strategic nightmares. Your own mind is racing, desperately replaying your words. The coolant intake, Sargonian sensor, blind spot. Where did you even get those details? Were they buried in some obscure intelligence report you'd skimmed and forgotten, only for your subconscious to dredge them up in a moment of inspired or catastrophically ill-timed creativity? Or was it just a wild, billion-to-one coincidence? The ramifications are staggering. You, in an attempt to explain a literary device, might have just demonstrated a level of intelligence penetration that would make Earth's own CIA or my six green with envy. The Silosian arbiter, from its central arbiter, Deus, observes the krill delegation with its ancient, unreadable gaze. Its crystalline facets seem to gather the light in the room, focusing it, perhaps, on the sudden, stark vulnerability of the usually belligerent krill. The arbiter says nothing, allowing the silence to work its potent magic. Ambassador Vorlag of the Zargonian Empire, along with his delegation, is now looking terribly bewildered. They're glancing from your alcove to the frozen krill, then back to you. There, back to you, fronds twitching with confusion. The Zargonians are looking back and forth between you and the krill delegation like spectators at a particularly weird tennis match where one player suddenly turned into a statue and the ball might be a live grenade. They can sense a monumental shift in the room's dynamic, but they clearly don't understand its cause. Not yet. You think of Operation Mincemeat from Earth's Second World War, also known as the Man Who Never Was. British intelligence concocted a fake identity for a corp, dressed him as a Royal Marine officer, chained a briefcase full of fabricated top-secret invasion plans to his wrist, and arranged for the body to wash ashore in Spain, where it was known German agents would find it. The Germans bought the deception hook, line, and sinker, believing the fake plans for an Allied invasion of Greece and Sardinia, and subsequently diverted crucial forces away from Sicily, the true target. The krill must now be feeling a similar chill, the horrifying possibility that their enemy, or potential enemies, possess devastatingly accurate intelligence about their deepest secrets. They might even suspect your hypothetical was a deliberate, coded message from humanity signaling your knowledge. Intelligence analysts on many worlds, including your own, still argue whether the most effective disinformation is a complete fabrication or a truth subtly twisted to lead to a false conclusion. You, by truthfully trying to explain irony, have inadvertently presented what the krill perceive as undeniable proof of your access to their most classified truths, leading them to the false conclusion that humanity is a covert superpower in galactic espionage. Whole situation is starting to remind you of Clever Hans, that famous horse in early 20th century Germany. Hans was believed by many to be capable of solving arithmetic problems, reading, and other intellectual feats, tapping out answers with his hoof. It was later discovered that Hans wasn't a mathematical genius, but was incredibly perceptive, responding to subtle, involuntary postural cues and facial expressions from his questioners or other observers who knew the answers. Must be wondering if you or humanity possess some equally imperceptible tell that allows you to divine secret, some unconscious leakage of information they were never aware of. Are they being read like an open book without even knowing it? The silence stretches, becoming almost unbearable. Then, from the krill alcove, there is a sound, a faint, rasping exhalation, as if air is being forced from a constricted bellows. Ambassador Carr's head, which had been bowed slightly in its frozen shock, lifts with a slow, deliberate effort that seems to take all his will. His crimson optic, now a dull, unsteady red, fix on you. The aggression is gone, replaced by something far more unsettling, a mixture of dawning horror, profound respect, and utter, bewildered fear. His voice, when it finally comes, is not the harsh, commanding baritone of before. It's a strained, gravelly whisper, amplified by his suit, but still barely audible in the vast hall. Terran, hearn, he. Begin. Each syllable seeming to cost him dearly. How? Key. Dars, whisper, desperate. How? Echoes in the profound silence of the convocation hall. A question aimed at you that feels like it being asked on behalf of his entire, suddenly terrified species. You swallow hard. What can you possibly say? Just a lucky guess? Big guy. My creative writing instructor always said to be specific. You try to explain, your voice sounding weak even to your own ears. Ambassador Ka. Esteemed delegates, I assure you, the scenario I described was a hypothetical construct, an illustration of dramatic irony, a coincidence, a deeply, profoundly unfortunate coincidence, I now realize, but a coincidence nonetheless. You try to offer a reassuring, if somewhat bewildered, smile. It probably looks more like a grimace of someone who's accidentally swallowed a bug. The Krilla delegation is not buying it, not for a nanosecond. Katir's remaining aide, a hulking krill, who hasn't moved a mollusk 5 minutes, slowly swivels its optical sensors toward you. If pure, unadulterated disbelief had a laser focus, you'd be a small pile of smoking carbon right now. You try to explain further. Honestly, it was just a wild guess. Pure fluke. My uncle once won a ham in a raffle with ticket number 17. My eBay, it's like that. The looks you get suggest they're not buying the lucky ham theory of galactic intelligence. To them, the precision of your hypothetical, the Zargonian sensor flaw, the FDL coolant vulnerability, is too exact, too strategically critical to be a mere chance. Their warrior minds, trained to see patterns and plots, can only arrive at one conclusion. Humanity knows. The other delegates witness this extraordinary exchange. Cathar, the formidable krill ambassador whose species is renowned for its unyielding aggression and military might, now visibly deflated. His voice a mere whisper, practically begging for an explanation from you, the representative of a minor, relatively new species. The effect is electrifying. If the krill, with their legendary counterintelligence networks and paranoia, are this shaken, what does it mean? A new wave of murmurs, hushed and urgent, begins to ripple through the hall. This isn't the confused babble from before. This is the sound of rapidly forming conspiracy theories. The Terrans, whispers a delegate from the aquiline cluster, a bird-like creature whose species is known for its keen eyesight and love of gossip. They must have operatives everywhere, a network that penetrates even the Krill High Command. From another section, Delegate Floopy-Doo of the gaseous nebulae confederacy, a shimmering, vaguely humanoid cloud of sentient particles, vibrates with alarm. Or perhaps this irony they speak of? It is not mere language. Could it be a psycho-linguistic weapon? A way to probe minds, to extract secrets through casual conversation, cloaked as literature. You make a note to take an extra-strength breath mint before the next session, just in case Floopy-Doo is onto something with pheromonal mind-reading. A third delegate, a representative of a mystical order from the Sagittarius arm, who believes in the interconnectedness of all things, nods sagely. They are listeners of the cosmic stream. It intones, their minds are not bound by mere sensory input. They perceive the currents of probability, the echoes of intent. What the Terran calls a hypothetical is merely a reading of what wish or what is about to be. The spotlight, which had been uncomfortably shared between the Krill and Zargonians, now swings with blinding intensity directly onto you, and by extension onto humanity. Suddenly, you're not just the quirky diplomat with the weird linguistic theories. You and your entire species are being recast as a silent, enigmatic power, a gray eminence operating in the shadows, possessing capabilities far beyond what anyone suspected. Congratulations, you've single-handedly upgraded humanity's galactic threat level from mostly harmless, occasionally amusing, to possibly omniscient, handle with extreme caution, and possibly a tinfoil hat. Diplomatic career is either over or just got really interesting. You feel a flush of profound discomfort. This is spiraling out of your control in a way you hadn't remotely anticipated. Your goal was to foster understanding, to prevent a war, by explaining a simple, communication concept. Instead, you've inadvertently triggered a wave of galactic paranoia centered squarely on your own species. You're not a super spy. You're a mid-level diplomat who reads too many history books and apparently has a dangerously overactive imagination when it comes to hypothetical examples. You think of the Cambridge Five, that infamous spy ring from mid-20th century Britain. Kim Philby, Donald MacLean, Guy Burgess, Anthony Blunt, and John Cairncross, all highly educated, well-placed individuals within British intelligence and government, who for decades secretly fed information to the Soviet Union. Their ability to operate undetected for so long, right under the noses of their colleagues, created a similar atmosphere of paranoia and distrust when they were finally exposed. It proved that even the most seemingly secure systems could be compromised from within by those you least suspect. The delegates here are likely imagining human equivalents seated throughout their own governments. This whole episode is starting to feel like the wow signal from 1977. That was a powerful, narrowband radio signal detected by the Big Ear Radio Telescope at Ohio State University, lasting for 72 seconds, seemingly all of the expected Sirius, and bearing all the expected hallmarks of a potential extraterrestrial transmission. It was never detected again, despite numerous searches. It became a tantalizing, unexplained mystery. Humanity, through your accidental reveal, has just become the wow signal of galactic diplomacy, a sudden, inexplicable burst of apparent insight and power that has left everyone baffled and deeply uneasy. Epistemologists back on Earth still argue whether coincidence is a statistically inevitable artifact of complex systems, or if it sometimes hints at deeper, unperceived causal links. Right now, looking at the faces around the convocation hall, you can tell which side of that debate every single delegate is landing on regarding your coincidence. The Silosian arbiter, ever the calm center of the storm, merely observes this rising tide of suspicion with its inscrutable, crystalline gaze. Perhaps it sees an unexpected opportunity in this chaos. A war is less likely if one of the perceived aggressors is suddenly terrified of a third party who might know all their secrets and isn't afraid to, however inadvertently, spill them. It's a peace maintained by fear and misunderstanding, rather than trust and clarity, but perhaps that's better than no peace at all. The hall remains thick with unspoken accusations and wild theories. The question of Zargonian insult is almost forgotten. The new burning question is, who garing these Terrans, really? And what else do they know? Esteemed delegate, Ambassador Carr, you plead, your voice earnest, perhaps a little too high-pitched. I must reiterate, There is no hidden meaning, no secret intelligence network, no precognitive ability at play here. The example was a product of creative thinking, based on common tropes in storytelling, a fictional scenario designed to illustrate a complex point. You're trying to put the genie of humanity, galactic super spies, back in the bottle, but the genie is now tap dancing on the bottle, wearing a tiny trench coat and sunglasses, and occasionally winking. It's not going well. Ambassador Keithar's gaze remains fixed on you. The raw terror has subsided slightly, replaced by a wary, calculating intensity. "Terran," he says, his voice still raspy but firmer now. "Your species, you process information in unique ways. This irony, this dramatic irony, is it a common Terran method for anticipating outcomes, for analyzing vulnerabilities based on narrative structure?" He's not accusing you of espionage directly, but he's clearly trying to understand how humanity apparently why thinks so differently, so dangerously. It's then that you see the true extent of your accidental psychological warfare. Other delegates begin to murmur again. But this time, their theories are not just about spies. They're re-evaluating your entire presentation through this new, terrifying lens. That delegate from City Alpha Verfa, the one who initially found irony intriguing, now looks aghast. That earlier example, a modest proposal about consuming young, they fluted, their voice trembling. Was that truly satire, or was it a veiled statement of Terran ruthlessness, a demonstration of the horrific solutions your species is capable of contemplating if pushed? So now, Jonathan Swift isn't just a satirist. He's apparently the ancient Terran master of psychological black ops. You wonder if they'll start analyzing Gulliver's Travels for star charts and hidden weapon schematics. Another delegate, a stoic, silicon-based life form whose species prides itself on unwavering logic, chimes in, its synthesized voice flat, the initial example of sarcasm. "Ah, great. When something negative occurs, emotional state, for feigning weakness or displeasure to lure an opponent into a false sense of security. The paranoia is infectious. Soon, they're questioning the very nature of irony itself. Is it a linguistic tool, as you claimed, or is it a sophisticated form of mimetic warfare, a way to introduce confusing, destabilizing concepts into other species' cognitive frameworks, making them question their own perceptions of reality? Your benign lecture on literary devices has somehow morphed into a demonstration of terrifying, misunderstood human insight. You came here hope note in a minor diplomatic incident. You're rapidly becoming the main character in a spy thriller that you didn't write and definitely don't want to star in. Even Ambassador Forlag of the Zargonian Empire, who had looked momentarily hopeful when you were dissecting Keith's people's message, now regards you with a new profound wariness. If humans can so casually reveal cruel secrets, however inadvertently, what Zargonian vulnerabilities might you also perceive through your strange, ironic lens? Forlag's earlier condescension towards you has vanished, replaced by a very nervous, very respectful attentiveness. The image of humanity in the Galactic Council is undergoing a rapid, alarming transformation. No longer the slightly amusing, upstart newcomers. Now, you are the quiet ones, the observers, the species whose deceptively simple words might carry layers of strategic meaning, far beyond anyone's comprehension. Your innocent attempt to explain a communication style has inadvertently made that style itself seem like an offensive capability. This reminds you of the CIA's infamous Mankoltra program during the Cold War. That was a top-secret and highly unethical, research project into behavioral modification and mind control, involving experiments with drugs, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, and psychological manipulation. While most of its aims were never achieved, and its methods were often horrific, the very existence of such a program, the idea that a major Earth power was actively trying to weaponize the human mind, fueled immense paranoia. The delegates here are now casting irony in a similar light as humanity's own subtle, insidious form of psychological warfare. Sociolinguists still argue whether a sufficiently advanced communication technique is indistinguishable from a form of psychological influence or even manipulation. The Council seems to have made up its mind on that one, at least where Terrans are concerned. It's threatened, like the placebo effect, in reverse. If people believe a sugar pill is a powerful medicine, they can experience real physiological benefits. Here, the Galactic Council, by believing humanity possesses some incredible, hidden insight or capability, is starting to react as if you draw. Their fear, their awe, their suspicion, these are real, and they are shaping their perceptions and potential actions. The Galactic Council is now experiencing a collective nocebo effect regarding humanity, expecting the worst and therefore seeing it everywhere in your words and explanations. The original dispute between the Krill and the Zargonians, the supposed insult that brought them to the brink of war, is rapidly fading into the background. It's like two schoolyard bullies about to trade punches who suddenly notice the quiet kid in the corner has just, without a word, bent a steel bar into a pretzel. Their personal squabble suddenly seems a lot less important than figuring out what the quiet kid is capable of. Silosian Arbiter continues to observe, its crystalline form impassive. You can't tell if it's buying into the paranoia, or if it's simply allowing the strange, unintended consequence of your lecture to play out. The terrifying thing is this fear, this misunderstanding of human capabilities, might actually be more effective at preventing the imminent war than any genuine diplomatic understanding ever could have been. Your attempt to build a bridge through communication has instead erected a wall of awe and fear around humanity. It's an accidental, deeply unsettling, but perhaps brutally effective form of psychological deterrence. And you, its unwitting architect, can only stand there and watch the chilling repercussions unfold. The air in the convocation hall remains thick with a potent cocktail of fear, suspicion, and wild speculation, all directed squarely at you and your unassuming home world. The Krill delegation is still a portrait of stunned apprehension, their primary concern having shifted from Zargonian insults to Terran omniscience. It's in this charged atmosphere that Ambassador Vorlak of the Zargonian Empire, who has been observing the escalating paranoia with wide, iridescent eyes, slowly gets to their feet. You can almost see the little Zargonian light bulb go on above Vorlak's fronds. It's not a very bright bulb, and it flickered a lot on its way to illumination, but it's definitely on now. Better late than never when galactic Armageddon is on the line. Vorlak looks different. The usual Zargonian arrogance, that innate sense of sophisticated superiority, has been sandblasted away, replaced by a humility that borders on outright alarm. They've just witnessed a major military power crumble into terrified whispers because of a Terran's hypothetical example. The implications are clearly not lost on them. If a human discussing literature can inadvertently expose the Krill's most guarded secrets, what might that same human deduce about Zargonian strategies, intentions, or even their own internal political squabbles, if they actually try? Esteemed Arbiter, Vorlak begins, their voice lacking its usual melodious confidence. now tinged with a distinct tremor. I address the council, and specifically the Krill hegemony and the representative from Terra. The arbiter grants permission with a slow, deliberate nod. All eyes or optical sensors turn to Vorlag. Ambassador Cathar, representatives of the Krill hegemony, Vorlag says, turning directly towards the Krill alcove. The Zargonian ambassador executes a deep formal bow, a gesture of profound respect rarely seen from their kind towards any other species. We, the Zargonian Empire, owe you an apology, a most sincere and unreserved apology. A fresh wave of murmurs sweeps the hall. An apology from the Zargonians, and a most sincere one at that. Vorlag continues, their voice strained. Our previous communication, the message which caused such profound offense, it was, as the Terran representative has saw, uniquely illustrated an attempt at outclaveau, our traditional form of sophisticated wordplay. Vorlag looks at you, a flicker of something unreadable in their eyes. Respect, fear, perhaps gratitude for inadvertently saving them from their own folly. At the time, we believed it to be a clever, if perhaps esoteric compliment. We failed utterly and catastrophically to consider how such a message, with its layered meanings and intentional ambiguities, would be perceived by a species that values, and indeed culturally mandates, absolute literalness. Vorlag is now backpedaling so fast, they're about to break the Zargonian land speed record for groveling. It's quite the performance. Part apology, part existential crisis, with a dash of please don't let the scary Terrans analyze us next. Hearing the Terran's explanation and witnessing the Krill's reaction to what they perceived as direct knowledge, it has become painfully clear to us our attempt at wit was not merely misunderstood. What merely misunderstood was, in this context, an act of profound communicative recklessness. For a species to whom words must mean what they say, our message could only have been interpreted as a deliberate, multifaceted insult. There was no malice intended, Ambassador Cathar, only arrogance and a blinding lack of intercultural foresight on our part. Vorlag takes a deep, shuddering breath. We were wrong. The fault lies with us, the Zargonian Empire. We deeply regret the distress our words have caused, and the dangerous escalation that resulted. We formally retract the message and offer our solemn assurance that no insult, veiled or otherwise, was aimed at the Krill hegemony's honored traditions, their formidable strength, or their noble heritage. Ambassador Cathar and the Krill delegation listen to this, still visibly shaken from your earlier inadvertent revelation. The apology from the Zargonians, while now secondary to their fear of humanity's supposed capabilities, is nonetheless significant. Cathar doesn't respond immediately, but the rigid tension in his posture eases almost imperceptibly. He's probably still processing the fact that his entire war strategy might be compromised, but the original casus belli is now being dismantled before his eyes. This entire situation is reminiscent of the Pig War of 1859. Back on Earth, a dispute between American and British settlers on the San Juan Islands, triggered by an American farmer shooting a British pig that was rooting in his garden, escalated to the point where both nations sent warships and hundreds of soldiers, nearly sparking a full-blown war over a dead farm animal. Ultimately, cooler heads prevailed, and the dispute was settled through peaceful arbitration years later without a single human casualty. Sometimes, the most dangerous conflicts can arise from the most absurdly minor provocations, and sometimes they can be diffused if the parties are willing, or perhaps sufficiently motivated, by other, more alarming factors. like the sudden appearance of a perceived psychic super spy species. Some delegates are nodding thoughtfully at Vorlag's apology. Others exchange cynical glances, perhaps believing the Zargonians are only backing down because they're intimidated by humanity's newfound, terrifying reputation. Diplomatic historians, you muse, will still argue whether a public apology is more effective as a tool for de-escalation when it appears sincere or when it's perceived as a strategic concession to a greater or more mysterious power. In this case, it seems to be a bit of both. You imagine some species, like the fictional Parchak from a humorous xenolinguistics text you once read, who suffer from semantic allergies. For the Plarchak, certain metaphors or ironic turns of phrase, if not accompanied by specific linguistic antihistamines, ritual counterphrases, could cause them to break out in painful bioluminescent hives. Zargonians, with their ill-timed clairvaux, nearly gave the entire Krill hegemony a galaxy-class case of semantic hives, with considerably more explosive potential. So your lecture on irony didn't directly make the Zargonians apologize. Made everyone think humans are psychic super spies, which yet then scared the Zargonians into realizing their joke wasn't funny enough to risk Terran scrutiny. Six-dimensional chess, played entirely by accident. You should write a paper. Survive this, Vorlag concludes. We hope in time the Krill hegemony can accept our profound regrets, and to the Terran representative, thank you. Your insights have been illuminating. Does it sound like they've just had a rather uncomfortable medical probe? The immediate, overwhelming threat of a Krill-Zargonian war, the conflict you were sent here to observe and hopefully help mitigate in some tiny way, seems to have suddenly, almost miraculously receded. The original wound has been addressed, the initial insult retracted and apologized for. The method was unorthodox, terrifying, and based on a complete misunderstanding of your intentions and capabilities, but the result might just be peace, at least between those two. The new human problem, however, is just beginning. The Silosian Arbiter, its crystalline form radiating a calm that feels almost alien in the emotionally charged hall, allows Ambassador Vorlag's apology to settle. The Zargonian Empire has offered its regrets and clarification regarding the initial communication. The Arbiter intones, its voice resonating through the chamber. The Krill hegemony has heard these words, while the path to full reconciliation might require further dialogue. The original impetus for this crisis appears to have been recontextualized. There's a slight pause, and you get the distinct impression the Arbiter is choosing its words with the same care one might use to disarm a particularly volatile ordnance. However, the Arbiter continues, its gaze sweeping across the assembled delegates before landing, with uncomfortable weight, on you. The subsequent discussions, particularly the demonstrations by the representative from Terra, have introduced a new and significant variable into our collective understanding of galactic dynamics. Oh, here we go, you think. The human factor. Ambassador Kethar of the Krill hegemony is given the floor. His demeanor is still subdued, the aggressive fire replaced by a cold, watchful caution. Esteemed Arbiter, Kethar rumbles, his voice devoid of its earlier fury. The Zargonian apology is noted. The hegemony will consider it. This is Krill speak for we're not attacking them right now because something much weirder and scarier is happening. Kar then turns his crimson optics to your alcove. Our primary concern at this juncture is the unexpected depth of Terran analytical capability. Any Prior grievances must be re-evaluated in light of this new paradigm. He doesn't say Terran omniscience, but is heavily implied a ripple of assent, or perhaps just shared anxiety, runs through the council. It is then that a delegate from a historically neutral, very ancient species known for its pragmatism, the Krelnari, who look like sentient, slow-moving coral reefs, proposes a formal motion. Given the unforeseen complexities and potential for profound misinterpretations in interspecies communication, as Saw vividly highlighted, the Krelnari delegate's voice is like pebbles shifting in a slow tide. And in light of the newly apparent strategic considerations, I propose an immediate galaxy-wide de-escalation of the current Zargonian-Krill standoff. Stand down from alert status and return to designated neutral zones, pending further council deliberation. The arbiter puts the motion to a vote. The vote for de-escalation passes faster than a free nutrient paste voucher at a starving diplomats' convention. It's almost unanimous. Everyone wants to hit pause before the humans accidentally reveal their homeworld's credit card PIN or something equally catastrophic to galactic security. The relief in the room is palpable, but it's not the joyful relief of a crisis truly resolved. It's the tense relief of people who've just realized the bomb they were focused on has a much larger, more unpredictable bomb sitting right next to it, possibly disguised as a harmless diplomat. Then comes the rider, proposed by the Ceti Alpha Vi delegate, the one who now likely views you as a potential mind-reading art critic. And furthermore, they flute, their voice still a little shaky. This council should establish a special ad hoc commission to undertake an urgent and thorough study of Terran communication methodologies, with particular emphasis on the phenomenon referred to as irony and its potential strategic and psychological implications. The representative from Terra should naturally be requested to provide extensive assistance to this commission. You've been cordially invited to lead the irony study group. It feels less like an invitation and more like being volunteered as tribute, but with volunteered as tribute. More paperwork and fewer pointy objects. Hopefully, you manage a weak nod of assent. What else can you do? Refuse and confirm their suspicions that humanity has something to hide. This entire situation feels like a bizarre echo of Earth's 19th century concert of Europe. After the Napoleonic Wars, the major European powers formed a loose alliance to maintain a balance of power, prevent any one nation from becoming too dominant, and manage crises through conferences and collective action. Their primary motivation was often a shared fear of revolution or the destabilizing ambitions of a rival. The Galactic Council is now, in effect, forming a concert of the galaxy in response to the perceived unpredictability of humanity. You've become the new, unsettling power they all need to keep an eye on and collectively manage. And your lecture notes, your attempts to explain swift and sarcasm, they are about to become the galactic equivalent of the Voynich manuscript, that mysterious, lavishly illustrated 15th century codex, written in an unknown script that no one has ever been able to decipher. Your explanations of irony will be endlessly analyzed, probably misinterpreted in 1,000 new ways, and definitely cause generations of xenolinguists and intelligence analysts severe headaches. Political scientists back on Earth still argue where a balance of terror. Peace is maintained by mutual fear of overwhelming retaliation, or, in this case, unpredictable consequences, is a stable long-term geopolitical strategy. The Cold War certainly had its moments of terrifying stability. The galaxy has just stumbled into its own version, with humanity as the new, unknowable X factor. So humanity's new galactic motto is, we're not sure how we do it, but apparently it terrifies people. Catchy, might look good on a t-shirt, or perhaps a warning boy attack. The edge of the Sol system. The arbiter bangs whatever passes for a galactic gavel. The motion for de-escalation is passed. The motion for a commission on Terran communication is passed. This council session is adjourned, pending the Commission's initial report. The immediate war between the Zargonians and the Krill is averted. Fleets will halt their advance. Trillions of lives will not be extinguished today, but is a peace born of profound confusion and a healthy dose of interspecies paranoia, not genuine understanding or goodwill. The galaxy is now deeply, deeply wary of Earth and its seemingly innocuous representatives. Your work here, you realize with a sinking feeling, has just begun, and it's a far stranger, more complicated job than you ever signed up for when you took diplomatic service on your career aptitude test. The convocation hall gradually empties. The rustle and click of departing delegates, a muted counterpoint to the frantic thumping of your own heart, which is only now beginning to slow. Many of them cast long, speculative glances your way as they pass your alcove, glances filled with a new, unsettling mixture of awe, suspicion, and outright fear. The immediate, sharp-edged tension of impending war has dissipated, but has been replaced by a quieter, more pervasive unease, a collective, galactic holding of the breath, all centered on the suddenly enigmatic species known as Terran. And on you. You lean back in your surprisingly comfortable chair, the one that molded itself to your form what feels like a lifetime ago, and let out a breath you didn't realize you'd been holding for hours. The irony of it all, the sheer, universe-sized, multi-layered irony, washes over you with the force of a rogue wave, a Zargonian diplomat trying to be clever with their species, equivalent of a snarky inside joke, nearly ignites a galactic war because the Krill, bless their literal heart, took it as a declaration of unadulterated contempt. Then you, in a desperate bid to explain the concept of not saying what you mean, accidentally stumble upon the Krill's most secret war plans while illustrating dramatic irony, making them believe humanity possesses some terrifying, godlike omniscience. This fear, this profound misunderstanding of your capabilities, is what ultimately pulls the plug on the conflict. Not any actual meeting of minds or diplomatic breakthrough. You set out to teach them that words can have hidden meanings, and they concluded the biggest hidden meaning is that humans are all-knowing super spies. It's a classic case of task failed successfully. You set out to teach them about irony, and now they think you're a Jedi master of psychological warfare. Close enough for government work, I suppose, if the government is the Galactic Council and the work is, don't die. And the ultimate punchline, now you, the accidental architect of this bizarre piece through paranoia, are tasked with leading a galactic commission to study the very concept that caused all this chaos. So your new job is basically professor of why humans are weird and weird, scary, and how not to annoy them by taking their jokes seriously, or literally, or at all. Tenure track, you hope, before you can fully process the absurdity. Ambassador Keithar appears at the entrance to your alcove. He doesn't enter, just stands there, his crimson optics fixed on you. The aggression is entirely gone, replaced by that same unnerving, cautious respect. Terran, he rumbles, his voice low, your ways are not our ways. Your minds, they perceive patterns that are invisible to Krill logic. He pauses. We will study, we will observe. Survival. And with that, he turns and strides away, a titan of war, now seemingly more concerned with understanding human literary devices than with interstellar conquest. Moments later, Ambassador Vorlag of the Zargonian Empire flutters by, their scales or Chitsuita, calm pastel green. Representative from Terra, Vorlak gushes, far too enthusiastically. A triumph of intercultural understanding. Though perhaps a rather uniquely structured triumph. They offer a nervous front twitch. The Zargonian Empire offers its full cooperation with your commission, any resources, any historical texts on Enclavo you might require. Consider them yours. We are most eager to foster clarity. Vorlag is practically vibrating with the desire to be seen as helpful, and above all, non-threatening to the galaxy's new mystery power. You nod wearily. Your future, it seems, is now inextricably linked with explaining the inexplicable to the uncomprehending. You are the galaxy's irony expert, a title you suspect comes with a lifetime supply of headaches and very confused alien students. It reminds you of the Cottingley Ferries incident. On Earth, in the early 20th century, two young cousins faked photographs of themselves with fairies using paper cutouts. Despite the crudeness of the fakes, many intelligent and prominent people, including Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of the hyperlogical Sherlock Holmes, believed them to be genuine evidence of supernatural beings. People often see what they want to see, or what they fear to see. The Galactic Council, confronted with your evidence, now sees humanity as something far more than it is, simply because the alternative, that it was all a string of bizarre coincidences and cultural misunderstandings, is perhaps too mundane, or too unsettling in its own chaotic way. Philosophers of language back on it, your homeworld still argue whether meaning is an inherent property of words or entirely constructed by context and the listener's perception. Your recent experiences are a pretty strong vote for the latter, with a hefty side order of listeners. Paranoia. You recall reading about a peculiar species from the Gliese 581 system, the shifting nomenclates, who ritually change their personal names based on their dominant emotional state or in response to significant life events. Gleep of the nomenclates, for example, reportedly became Floopy Gleep after hearing the Zargonian apology, then transitioned to Snorgelblatt after the Commission on Terran Irony was announced. Keeping track of their diplomatic credentials was, according to the report, a full-time job for at least 3 junior archivists. The current galactic situation feels just as fluid and confusing as trying to address a shifting nomenclate correctly during a particularly emotional trade negotiation. You sigh, a long, slow exhalation that feels like it carries the weight of several star systems. At least the food on the Irony Commission will probably be better than the nutrient paste you eyed earlier. Unless, of course, it's ironically bad, in which case you're in for a very long, very bland, and deeply unsettling assignment. The immediate adrenaline of crisis and revelation is beginning to fade, leaving behind a profound sense of fatigue and the dawning, rather terrifying, understanding of the task ahead. You didn't just avert a war, you've inadvertently reshaped humanity's place in the galaxy, turning your species into an enigma to be studied, feared, and perhaps, one day, if you're very, very lucky, actually understood. But that day feels a long way off. Right now, the galaxy is quiet, holding its breath, waiting to see what the strange, insightful, and utterly unpredictable Terrans will do, or say, or accidentally reveal next. Designated interpreter are right in the quiet, unnerving center of it all. The chamber is almost empty now, the vastness of it amplifying the soft hum of the station's life support, a sound that seems to breathe with a life of its own. Indifferent to the near cataclysm that just unfolded, you feel a profound weariness settle into your bones, the kind that comes after a storm has passed, leaving an eerie calm in its wake. The grand pronouncements and accusations have faded. replaced by the quiet rustle of departing delegates and the lingering scent of a dozen different alien atmospheres. Your mission, as you understood it, is over, yet a new, far stranger one has just begun. The weight of it feels immense, yet oddly distant, as if you're watching yourself from afar. The path ahead is shrouded in the mists of misunderstanding, a journey into the heart of how different minds perceive reality, all because of a few ill-chosen words and a human's fumbling attempt to explain the concept of not quite meaning what you say. The lights in the great hall begin to dim, casting long, soft shadows that seem to stretch towards an uncertain future. You close your eyes for a moment, just for a moment, letting the quiet hum of the universe, or perhaps just the station's ventilation system, lull you. The war is over, for now, and that, in itself, is a strange, unexpected kind of peace. Sleep, perhaps, will offer a temporary reprieve before the real work of explaining humanity to a bewildered galaxy begins.